Welcome everybody to another Tidepool for Telemedicine webinar extravaganza. Extravaganza might be sounding a little too hard, but it's good to be back with the red light on. Dr. Saleh Adi is here. Dr. Adi, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Christopher. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I am here, Tidepool Community Manager. Welcome again to another settings exploration. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we're going to talk a little bit about, here we go. We're talking about utilizing diabetes data to understand and evaluate the effect of everyday life activities. Again, as a reminder, we're here to talk about, as a clinician, how you as a clinician can approach using data to make these changes. We're not here to offer specific medical advice for you or for your patients. The data is the foundation for the discussion, but ultimately it's a one-on-one conversation with your patients as you move forward. When in doubt, diabetestelemedicine.org is a one-stop shop for all of Tidepool's telemedicine-focused resources. This global pandemic thing isn't going away anytime soon. Neither are we. We're here to help as it relates to your telemedicine efforts. Also, if you ever have any questions, please send an email to support@tidepool.org, and we will get back to you as quickly as possible. It's go time, Dr. Adi. I'm going to hand over this little bit here, and we're going to have ourselves a fun conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Christopher. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning or evening, wherever you are. And I'm just going to share my screen and get the logistics up there. Where is my screen? This one? Yes. And let us do the presentation mode. And I hope everyone can see my screen now, and it's in full screen. And this is our great. Thank you, Christopher. And really, what we wanted to, I didn't put a title for this one because I figured, it was a long title. Christopher sort of presented that. And our objective today is really to sort of work through the process of looking at the data. I'm going to talk very little about, certain events and certain trends that we're identifying or settings that we need to adjust. We've gone through some of those in the previous 2 or 3 webinars, and we'll talk some more hopefully in future webinars. But I think today is really more focused on the process itself and helping you sort of get comfortable with it and just going through the elements of the data one by one and bit by bit rather than trying to change somebody's settings. So I'm going to start with, a few things to consider before we dive right in. And I always like to say, it's not all about the numbers. And sometimes we just have to use our discretion and use our judgment. And remember that life with type 1 diabetes is really hard. And when you see a patient or when you're talking to even your own child, if you're a parent, sometimes, take a step and say, how is it going? Is there anything that's bothering you? Is there anything that we need to talk about? And it's not all about the numbers all the time. And if you're seeing a patient, when I'm seeing a patient in the clinic, they don't want to look at the numbers, and that's okay. We can talk about something else. But if we decide that, okay, no, it's fine, life is good and everything is okay, and we need to look at the data, I think it's important to pick the most relevant 7 to 14 days of data. And what are the most relevant days? I think, sometimes it comes down to asking the patient, has this been a representative week in the past week? And if it is, then fine. I think, looking at 7 days of data is actually good enough. And I get this question a lot, like how many days do you go back and how far do you go back to keep the data relevant? And I think looking back at the previous 7 to 14 days is the most appropriate because it's very recent and it's relevant. And that the patients will actually remember certain events that happened during those days because we're going to need to ask some questions. But it's okay to not be able to do that and say that, no, this is not a relevant week and it's really a non-representative week. And I think it's fine to go back a week before that, but I wouldn't go too far in the past. I think if you go back more than 3 weeks, then the data has become old and the child may have changed, or the season may have changed, or things may have changed, the routine, going back to school, going off school, traveling, etc. And I think that's, it becomes too old. So it's better to stick, if possible, to the previous 7 to 14 days. And remember that it's okay not to find any trends or make any changes. And it's okay to say, let's not do anything right now. We're going to wait another 7, 14 days and come back and look at the data in a week or 2 from now. Approach is always systematic. I think, really need when looking at data to be approaching it in a systematic way, one by one, day by day, and hour by hour. And then when I'm talking about data, we're really not talking about just the CGM data, although there are a lot of people who look at CGM data only because they don't have time to look at everything else or to put it all together. And I think this is the one thing that Tidepool has done very, very nicely, which is to combine and aggregate the data from all of the devices, including the pumps and the CGMs, putting it together and displaying it on the screen in a meaningful and actionable way. So the data is not just CGM data, it's CGM, insulin, food, and other contextual data that are available, as we will see in the next few slides, that I think are going to become very important in interpreting the data. Now, that's not to take away from the value of just CGM data. There are a lot of software that will actually look at only CGM data. And I think when there are very obvious trends and for big picture presentations and big picture look at the data, just the CGM data can be helpful in identifying certain things if there are obvious trends. But oftentimes there aren't no obvious trends just by looking at CGM data. And oftentimes, even when there are trends, like blood sugar is rising at a certain time of the day, or blood sugar is dropping at a certain time of the day, why is that happening? I think it's important to go back and look at the daily views, the detailed daily view, and looking at the CGM and the insulin data and the food data to identify what's working and what's not working. And I didn't put that actually here in writing, but I think it's important to remember, this is a very important point, which is when we're looking at the data, we're not just looking at what's not working and let's fix it. I think it's also important to remember that let's be looking at what's working and learn from that so that we can apply it to the areas where things are not working very well. And another important principle is to look for consistent trends. Just because you see something that's happening once, it doesn't mean that we need to make a change based on that one-day event. It needs to be consistent, happening, not necessarily on consecutive days, but perhaps three to 4 days out of the week, the same thing is happening. Okay, that is a trend, but not just one time. And if we do make a change based on a trend that's obvious, make small changes. Don't make the big jumps, like just if you think that you need to increase the carb ratio by 2 points, go by 1 point. If you need to increase the basal rate by 0.2 units an hour, just go by 0.1 unit an hour. Make that change. Give it a few days. Don't make another change a day later, because there are many factors that can affect blood sugar. So, the change that you made may not be necessarily very obvious in one day. You need to give it a few days and then go back and look and say, how did that change work? Is it enough? Is it not enough? Is it too much? Then we can make another change. Big picture summary should always come first. And I'll show you an example of that. Basically, if we look at the big picture, the whole 2 to 4 weeks of data all together aggregated, then I think we can get a good view of, are there any trends, or are there any trouble spots that we need to focus on and drill in? Because it's nearly impossible to fix everything or to look at everything all, there's limited time and we can't fix all of the settings all at once. I think it's important to remember, just let's look at the most obvious one, the one that's going to give us the best return, and focus on that, and let's make those changes and see one thing at a time. So first we start with the big picture, and like I said, if we want to know what's happening and which settings that we need to use, we've got to go to the daily views. And when we're looking at the daily views, the day by day and hour by hour, I want us to remember to always go from left to right and top to bottom. And this is going to come up over and over the next few slides, always left to right and top to bottom, and you'll see what I mean by that. So here's one example of the big picture, the trends view, where we can actually see the entire 4 weeks of data aggregated. This is CGM data, aggregated in just one slide, giving us all of the numbers that have happened, all the blood sugar numbers that have happened over the past 4 weeks, starting at midnight and going all the way to noon and then back again at midnight. And what we can see here, at first look, we can see that we actually have a pretty nice and steady blood sugars at night that are right around 100 to 120 and ending up in a very tight range by the morning. But the obvious trend here is right after breakfast, that mid-morning high blood sugar right here. And that's actually exceeding out of the target range of 70 to 180. And with the median number, this is the numbers that are in the middle, half of the numbers are above and half the numbers are below. The median numbers are now exceeding the target range and then coming back down. And we see the same thing happening in the mid or late afternoon here again. So these are the two, I apologize for that. Somebody's texting me. What we see here is that these are the two sort of trouble spots, mid-morning and then late afternoon, that are probably worthy of looking a little deeper into them. And a few questions came to me over the past couple of weeks as to what are all of these bars here representing and these gray colors. And what I do want to point out, because I think this is an important feature, is that all this bar here represents all of the values that have happened between 9 and 9:30 a.m. for the past 4 weeks. So you can see it's a wide range and there's a lot of variability, while here around 6 or 7 a.m. the numbers are actually pretty tight, right around the median here. So if we want to get rid of all of these outliers here that are extreme blood sugars that are high and lows, we can simply uncheck the 100% of reading and we get 80% of reading. So we get rid of the outliers 20% and we get only the 80%, and that's on the next screen here. You can see we got rid of those, and that actually is, to me, is a better one to look at because that represents 80% of the readings without those extreme outliers on the upper end and the lower end. And that, again, it didn't change the trend, but I think it's obvious here that we have a very good control overnight, but we have these two peaks right here that we should probably address. And one other tool that is nifty is to, if you want to look at certain days of the week, you can uncheck this and just click on only Mondays or Tuesdays or whatever. And one thing that we did here is uncheck the weekdays and looked at only Saturday and Sunday for this gentleman. And here's what we see here is actually this mid-morning peak that was going up high after breakfast is gone on the weekdays, Saturday and Sunday. And it's the evening one that's persistent here. And we actually have even higher blood sugars right here in the evening. But the morning one has gone. So this is an issue happening during the weekday when he is working. And perhaps we can talk about just the weekdays and say, okay, what is going on there? Is it not enough insulin for the carbs? Is it eating different breakfast? Is it not pre-bolusing long enough before breakfast because rushing to start to work? We can talk about those, but we're not going to get into that because, again, the focus today is more about the process itself of how do we look at the data. And this is the value of looking at the big picture trends view and identifying certain spots that we need to work on and where those trends are happening. Is it weekdays? Is it certain day of the week? Or is it the weekend? All right. Once we identify those trouble spots, if you will, that we want to work on, I think, in order to really figure out what's going on, what's working and what's not working, we need to move then from the trends view, the big picture view, into the daily detailed view and start looking at, day by day, hour by hour. And remember, it's always left to right and top to bottom. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's one example, and we're going to stick with this slide for just a couple of minutes because I think it's really informative. Here's one slide, and let me just orient everybody who is not familiar with Tidepool. So for those who are familiar, just bear with me. We have 4 areas of data here. We have the top line here. We have this one here with the CGM data. And then we have here the bolus and carbohydrates, where in this yellow circle, we have the amount of carbohydrates, 23 grams. And this is the bolus here. Every blue bar is a bolus. And then back here at the bottom is the basal rate. This is the basal rate that's running as scheduled. You can see that, and hopefully you can see that there's a little bit of gradation in the basal rate going up here and then coming back down. And the shaded one here that you can see kind of like a skyline of of a few buildings, that's an increase in the basal because this person is using a tandem control IQ with automated insulin delivery. And the automation can actually increase the basal automatically if it sees the blood sugar is rising, or it can give an extra bolus of insulin if it sees the blood sugar is rising and it's not coming down despite adjusting the basal rate. And it can only do a bolus every hour here. So it has to do one bolus and wait an hour to give the other one. So when we see boluses that are an hour apart, these are more likely to be boluses by the system, an auto bolus, not necessarily a bolus given by the patient themselves. So time of the day and some post-it notes. If the patient is putting some information here in a post-it note, they can actually do it here. And we'll see a few examples of those. The CGM data here, and the green is in the target range 70 to 180 or 3.9 to 10 for those who use millimoles. And then the purple is higher and the red is lower. We don't see any red in this particular day here. We only see green and purple. But we start left to right. I always like to start with midnight and end at midnight. So start at midnight, blood sugar is nice and steady for the whole night. Nothing is happening. It's actually great. There's maybe just a tiny, tiny trend that it's dropping a little bit here at 7 a.m., but otherwise it's still nice and around 100. Wakes up in the morning, 9 a.m. Now we see a sudden sharp rise in the blood sugar. This is where I go, we were talking about left to right. I see a change in the blood sugar trajectory. That's when I go top to bottom and say, okay, what happened there? There's a meal, there's an event here. We're gonna call this an event. There's a meal that happened here. It's 23 grams and she got a bolus for it. And then down here at the basal, was there a major change? The answer is no, the basal is running okay. And the system responded with the blood sugar rising by giving some extra basal rate right here, increasing the basal just a tiny bit, waiting for the blood sugar to come down, and then it went back down to baseline. So what happened here? We have a breakfast, we have a meal that was given, and the timing, again, looking into a little bit more detail, digging deeper into it. At first look, it's simple. We got a breakfast, we got a rise in the blood sugar and it came back down, everything worked okay. There's a lot more information to gain from that. One is, looks like the blood sugar started rising right here immediately before 9 o'clock. This is the 9 o'clock line. The bolus was given exactly at 9 o'clock. And if I hover over this, it can actually tell me that. But what this says is that the bolus was given right at the meal. There was no pre-bolusing before the meal. So this person is not necessarily sticking to the pre-bolus for breakfast, 15 to 20 minutes. It's actually given right at the meal, and the blood sugar is rising immediately. The other piece of information that is important, here's the bolus at 9, and the blood sugar is still rising. When did the blood sugar start coming back down? It didn't start coming back down until about here, which is about 30 minutes after the bolus is given. So there are two important pieces of information that we just learned about this particular patient. One is that no pre-bolusing for this one, and it looks like when the food is eaten here and the bolus is given, the blood sugar begins to rise immediately after eating. And the last piece of information is that it takes insulin about 30 minutes to start working in this particular person at this particular time of the day. It's not necessarily the same all day. So there's a 30-minute lag before insulin starts working, and the breakfast food seems to come in immediately, and this person is not doing a pre-bolus for breakfast. So we go back and continue from left to right and see what happened here. It came down. It actually came down right nicely to where we started. So it seems like the insulin to carb ratio seems to be okay. Although if we look really closely, we see that there was a little bit of bolus right here. And then there was an increase in the basal rate here. So perhaps maybe he or she does need a little bit more insulin for the carbs, but it seems to be okay right now. And we keep going. So we keep moving here, no events here, nothing is happening, blood sugar is okay, blood sugar is okay. And all of a sudden it starts rising again. And that's where I drop back down here, top to bottom, and say what happened. What happened here is that she probably ate a little snack and didn't bolus for it. the blood sugar started rising. Control IQ recognized that, gave a little bolus, and then increased the basal rate to keep up with it. And it did a fairly nice job. And look what happened again. Here's the bolus right here. And here is the blood sugar rising. And in about 30 minutes later, the blood sugar starts dropping. Consistently, this bolus took 30 minutes to start working. This bolus took 30 minutes to start working. These are important things to remember, to have in the background of our head as we're looking at the data, as we're manipulating. How far in advance do we need to bolus? This person's blood sugar, insulin takes 30 minutes to start working. That's not true for everyone. Everybody is different. So at least 30 minutes before meal to pre-bolus would be appropriate for this one. Here's what I was saying when I hover over this. It actually tells us all the information here. 23 grams, the insulin to carb ratio was 1 to 5, and the calculation was 4.6 units, and that's exactly what it delivered, 4.6 units. Perhaps this is not enough. This was given at exactly 9 a.m. So let's see what the next slide is. I believe that we did the same thing for this one, and it gave us all of the calculations that went into it, so we understand where this 7 units bolus came from. It came from 35 grams, 1 to 5 carb ratio. So that is 35 divided by 5. That's a 7 units for the carbs. There was a correction bolus because the blood sugar is 170 minus the target of 110, and the ISF is 30. So 170 minus 110, that's 60 divided by 30. That's 2 units for a correction. But there was an insulin on board of 2.6 units. So the system says, forget it, I got 2.5 units on board. Let's just cover the carbs only. And that's exactly what happened there. And what happened there is that it wasn't quite enough. So we will go back out to the CGM tracing and continue to go left to right. And we see we actually ended up being a little bit on the high side, suggesting again that the insulin to carb ratio is not enough. Despite all this extra insulin that we gave here, a little bolus here, a little bolus there. And finally, after these increases in the basal rate, the blood sugar starts coming down and actually comes down back to normal here, to around 100, suggesting again that for 35 grams, giving 7 units was not enough. It actually required a lot more to bring it back down, or that the 35 grams was not an accurate carb count. So we can sort of guess at that. But we see that the same thing is happening after dinner. It goes up again. So maybe it's really actually an insulin to carb ratio that we need to adjust, and we can increase it by 1 point only. Instead of 1 to 7, I make it 1 to 6, or even 1 to 6.5. Little step at a time, make an adjustment, wait a few days, come back and reassess again. All right, here's an example of just one big picture. Even looking at the single day at the daily view, you can actually sometimes just look at one big picture and see that, hey, what's going on here? The blood sugar is just purple and rising the whole time, despite all of these boluses right here. And then all of a sudden here around 11 p.m., it starts to come down nicely here, sharply, and then it goes steady for the rest of the night. So clearly right here, something wasn't working, a set that's not working, or a plugged catheter, or the insulin that went bad, or something else. But it's basically a mechanical issue. This isn't a settings issue. At just one look at this day, you can immediately tell something wasn't working, and then finally change the set here, and all of a sudden everything is working beautifully. So there's no reason to look at any of this data here and analyze anything, any of the settings, or to do anything in a systematic way. This is an only opportunity to tell this patient, if you see this again happening, don't wait too long before you finally change the set. This is, probably right here, there was an indication that something wasn't working. It wasn't 100% set failure, because otherwise you would have gone much higher. Insulin was doing something, but it wasn't 100% effective. So when you see this, just change the set. Otherwise, you might end up with some ketones later. All right, here's another example where going systematic from left to right. Note that the time here is not beginning at midnight. We're actually starting at 6 a.m. I chose that just so that we can, focus on this area right here. Going from left to right, we can see the blood sugar is dropping, dropping, dropping here. It's late, it's now 11 o'clock. Finally, she wakes up and eats breakfast at 11. So we're gonna keep this in mind. If this actually repeats again, just one day We're not going to make a change. We're going to see this. If this is happening day and day and day, then that means that is a trend that the basal rate may be too high and we need to make an adjustment. But again, this is about the process, not about what we're going to change. What we see here is a sharp increase in the blood sugar. Immediately, I go back down here and say what happened. There was no bolus for food. The bolus for food came about an hour later or longer. What happened here is that blood sugar started rising. That means she ate her breakfast here, and unfortunately, she forgot to bolus for it. And there's nothing else that can do this, a very sharp rise in blood sugar that happened right around here in the morning. Clearly, that's a meal bolus that was forgotten, unfortunately. So the system, control IQ, sees the blood sugar rising, gives a little bolus, increases the basal rate quite a bit. It's almost double or triple the basal, trying to keep up with this. And it does actually sort of start working here. And then what happened there again here, that's when it starts working. Start dropping, blood sugar start dropping. And look at the timing as we actually draw a line between here and here. This is when I say top to bottom right here. The bolus was given right here and the blood sugar start to drop immediately? No, we know that this person actually takes 30 minutes for the insulin to start working. So this drop right here was the result of this bolus and this increase in the basal rate. And eventually this bolus came in and actually dropped the blood sugar here and came in nicely and landed right around 90 or 95 and then went okay. But here we identify why this sharp rise that went up blood sugar almost all the way to 300. It's because there was a missed bolus that came in late. She finally remembered after she saw all of this blood sugar rising and say, I forgot the bolus, let's do the bolus right here. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because the insulin to carb ratio here is not enough, she ended up actually not having a low blood sugar. If we had a higher insulin to carb ratio and she bolused the right amount for the 42 grams, that would have been too much because the bolus for this and the increased basal and this little bolus right here. And that unfortunately is a consequence of a late bolus, that oftentimes it ends up that the system is increasing your basal rate already and giving you more insulin, and then you take your bolus on top of that and you end up low. But because she ate her breakfast very late and bolused for it very late, she actually didn't get the breakfast ratio, she got the daytime ratio, which is much less than 1/5. This is 1/7 grams. And that's why she ended up okay. Anyway, we keep going, everything is okay. There's a little, zigzagging here, and the system is sort of responding to it. And then what we see here is a sharp rise in the blood sugar again, and no bolus for the carbs. So this was a tiny little snack. We know that she's snacking a little bit here without having to bolus for it, and the system is making up for it, and it's working. So we can just, let it go, but notice here, there's this trend going up, going up, going up, and finally starts coming down when she stopped eating. And I'm not sure that you can see this on the screen. There are microboluses right here, microbolus right here, microbolus right here, and increases in the basal, and that's what's dropping. But what we're seeing here is a trend to going up. The more she eats, the higher she goes, perhaps again confirming that it's not enough insulin for the carbs, just like we saw on the previous slide. And then that confirms that we probably should try a little higher insulin to carb ratio. All right, so we're just going to skip that and go back. And here's one example, a different example of how the data can inform what's happening, what's going on, and actually trigger the questions to ask. And you say, why did this happen? So let's look at this. Just focus on this 6 a.m. after breakfast event. What we have here is a patient who's using loop. This is not control IQ. This is a much smaller child using DIY loop. And the way we know that is that just the way it adjusts the basal rate right here. It either suspends the basal and or gives a microbolus. And again, you can't see that right here. But if you look here, you'll see all these microboluses given by the system, automated insulin delivery. It's actually doing microboluses however many times it requires. It's not limited to one every hour, one bolus, just like the tandem control IQ here. And at the same time, it can also suspend the basal rate. It cannot increase the basal rate because it gives you a bolus, but it will suspend the basal rate. So let's go back here. Again, left to right, everything looks great. Looks good. just a glass here at the bottom. Is anything happening? What we see is there's a lot of suspension of the basal. So perhaps the basal is too much and it's actually having to suspend it and reduce the basal delivery. But it's also giving this tiny micro boluses right here. So maybe this is just making up for each other and the blood sugar is okay. So we're just gonna ignore that. And then finally we see here a sharp drop in the blood sugar. It dropped right here and went low, and we have to treat the low and bring it back up. So we go top to bottom and say, what happened there? What's the event that triggered or was around that low blood sugar? It was a 16-gram breakfast and a bolus for it. Looks pretty good. So 16 grams for a small child, that sounds reasonable. Ate it, bolused for it, so why is this happening here? And that's what we sort of question. Did we pre-bolus for the breakfast? And it looks like there was a pre-bolus for breakfast. It's hard to know when did he actually eat the breakfast because we don't have a rise in the blood sugar at all. Did we pre-bolus and forget to eat the whole 16 grams, just completely forgot to eat? That's possible. It might have happened and that could cause this blood sugar to drop. Or which is really what happened here, is that ate breakfast really quickly. It was only a small breakfast, 16 grams, and then went out to play immediately after eating breakfast. When somebody goes out to exercise immediately after a meal, the blood supply shifts all to the muscles where the muscles are working. So all the oxygen in the blood supply goes there. There's very little oxygen in blood going to the stomach and the intestine because digesting food is not as important as providing the energy for the muscles that are running around. So when we go and exercise immediately after a meal, we stop the digestion of food and the absorption of the carbs as if you didn't eat anything in here, but you got that insulin that's working. And in fact, it's going to work even better and faster because you're exercising. So you have increased sensitivity to the insulin. And then the insulin starts working quickly and brings the blood sugar down and the food is not going anywhere. So this is basically an extra bolus when the blood sugar was already at 100 and it causes the blood sugar to go down. Not to mention the effect of the exercise on increased glucose utilization and absorption. So we have this low blood sugar. And then what happened here? We treat the low and it goes back up. And again, at first glance, it's just a treatment of the low, but actually there's an indication that this parent of this little child did a great job of not over-treating the low. It was just enough to bring him back up into the green zone right around 80 to 85, and he went steady after that. So this is a positive thing to talk about and to recognize that we're not over-treating the low, which is a great thing to do. It's a great habit because it's easy to panic and then give too much carbs, but we did much better here. And then what happened here? Blood sugar started to rise. So why is this rising here all of a sudden? That's when he finished playing, came in, treated the low, sat around, and now the 16-gram breakfast starts to get digested right here. We can actually see all of that. So by following the line and then dropping down and see what event happened there, and sometimes there will be some other contextual data here. I gave this much juice. We can gather a lot of information and understand what happened here, what happened here, and what happened here. If we just pay attention and do it in a systematic way and left to right, top to bottom. Again, 2 meals, 2 boluses, working great. Everything is going well, everything is going well, everything is going well. And then we see here in the evening, now this is rising. Now this is a lot of blood sugar rising here. And I don't think that this is related to a single event. There are probably many things that are happening here. If there's not enough insulin for the carbs here, would this cause this much of a rise here for this long? I don't know. But the point here is that I don't understand what happened there. So sometimes we look at the data and just we really don't get it. And that's where we need to have a conversation and ask, what are the possibilities? Was there another meal that we missed? Was this really 30 grams? Are you sure it was 30? How confident are you? Sometimes it's really hard to actually count the carbs for dinner. Anyway, we can go through this. Here's another example of this. Actually, I think it's the same child on a different day where we can see that, let's just focus on these 2 things right here. 2 hypoglycemia, and one of them were pretty bad right here. And it happened right after breakfast again. 30 grams for breakfast, the bolus, you know, we can start from here, but this all looks great. We do notice that there was a lot of suspension of the basal. So perhaps again, two days that we've seen that there was a lot of suspension. So maybe we should consider that the basal rate is a little too high here, that we need to reduce it a little bit. See if we can maintain this nice steady line throughout the night without having the anxiety about, is this too close and it's going to drop if we don't suspend the basal. But here's the breakfast, and let's go through it again, step by step. Blood sugar is starting to drop right here. This is right after the bolus was given. The bolus doesn't take too long to start working. It's almost immediate. It lowers the blood sugar. And then about half an hour later, the blood sugar rises quickly. So clearly this person pre-bolus 30 minutes, blood sugar dropped, and now he ate the breakfast and it goes up. And it goes up sharply. The system responds. It actually gives him 3 or 4 different boluses right here to counter this rise in the blood sugar because it's predicting a very high. And it starts working fairly quickly and starts coming down. Comes down, comes down, comes down. It just keeps going. Even though the basal was suspended here, so again, going up and down, sorry. Even though the basal was suspended, did not prevent this hypoglycemia from happening here. It should have, but it turned out that after breakfast, again, he went out and played in the yard. But this was not going out to play immediately after he ate. That's why we didn't have that same phenomenon that we saw earlier in the previous slide. What we see here is a late drop in the blood sugar. So the digestion of the food and the absorption completed, got the insulin to start working, and then the exercise is what really made him more sensitive to insulin here and used up his sugar from the breakfast and dropped and went low. And again, we treated the low. We can see that. That's a nice treatment of the low. It was a much lower blood sugar than the previous event. So gave him a little bit more carbs and did a great job again by not over treating and shooting way too high. Gave just enough to get the blood sugar up. And then as the BG is rising, Loop gives him a little bolus and then he eats another meal and we cover it. And the point here that I want to make is, it's in the title, extended effect of the exercise. This was a pretty intense exercise that made him drop so much. Just because he stopped exercising here doesn't mean the effect of the exercise is done. We can actually see that right here. And by looking at the data, we identified that this person actually has a tendency to have a late effect of exercise or an extended effect of exercise. So again, to learn and say, what should we do differently next time? If we play this hard, then maybe we should pay attention here and give a little bit less insulin for the carbs, or override and say, no, I'm not going to take 1.3 units. I'm going to take 1 unit only, or give some extra free carbs, or just simply watch and see. It worked out very well at the end here. We treated this and it really worked out very well. Look what happened in the evening. Almost the same picture that we saw. So what's going on here? 2 days that we've seen the same thing, even though there was quite a bit of boluses for the carbs here. And we can have a conversation about this again now. This is a trend that's happening more than once. And we look, if we see this a 3rd time or a 4th time, perhaps we really need to increase the insulin to carb ratio for dinner, or we really need to bump up the basal rate right here. But this is how we kind of sort of identify, step by step, minute by minute, hour by hour, and just seeing there's a lot of information to be gleaned as to what happened here. Oftentimes I see people and say, I don't get it. I don't know what happened here. And the answer is walk through it step by step. You will be able to identify exactly what happened. Here's another example.
We've got a quick time check. We've got about 20 minutes left on the webinar, and I do want to pop in with the question in from Deborah, which I think has been sort of relevant throughout all the examples you've given us. Her question is, how do you differentiate when you see a rise after eating between the patient needing to strengthen the insulin to carb ratio, or more accurately, or improve their carb counting accuracy? It's at the end of the day, the data is not going to lie, but also may not necessarily tell the complete picture regarding patient interaction and the decisions that they're making. So how do you approach using the data to make a recommendation, whatever that recommendation may be, versus using it to initiate a conversation around habits around their diabetes management, like carb counting, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And then the other possibility is maybe it's not the carb ratio or the carb counting, it's actually the timing of the bolus in relation to when the meal was eaten. So that's when you sort of identify, by lining up the boluses and the change in the blood sugar, you can identify, is this something that happened because the bolus was not given early enough, or was it given after he ate or she ate? You can identify that those rises are really not a problem of insulin to carb ratio. It's a timing of the bolus. Because if the blood sugar eventually comes back down to baseline where you started, then the insulin to carb ratio is okay. It's really not about the insulin to carb ratio. And then the other thing is, which sometimes it actually is pretty obvious, where just like we saw in the previous two slides, where that insulin to carb ratio, if it's not enough, you will see a gradual increase throughout the day. The more you eat, the higher you go. Well, that's an indication where you can't be messing your carb count for every single meal. I mean, it's possible, but obviously, if this is happening for every meal, then chances are that every time you eat, you go higher. You probably need a little bit more insulin for those carbs. So again, a few little tricks and hints from experience as to which one is it? Is it the timing? Is it the insulin to carb ratio, or is it the carb counting? And I can tell you, carb counting, it's one of the hardest things to do. And I don't think anybody does it accurately, even if they measure and weigh every single thing. And it's not by their fault, it's just the way it is. A glass of milk from one brand can be 18 grams, and the same glass of milk from another brand can be 16 grams. And those can make a difference in a small child. So we do our best we can. And if there's a question about carb counting, just talk about it and say, for the next 3 days, I really want you to pay a little bit closer attention to the carb counting, and let's see if it's a carb counting problem.
Yeah. Deborah, I would also give a plug to our notes feature. If you have the ability to request your patients, even for it's 2 or 3 days, take more detailed records around the timing of events. If it's just breakfast, have them actually document what they ate for breakfast, when they bolused, when they actually ate, adding those additional details in the moment, whenever they are fresh, will make reviewing the data after the fact a little more hopefully productive. I'm going to guarantee it'll be productive, but it'll increase the chance of productivity in those conversations when you have a little more context, a little more data around the event itself to include that. At least I've found success in that with my personal diabetes management. Whenever I see challenges or opportunities for improvement, I will focus for a couple of days and take detailed records using Tidepool Mobile to document those things that I care about. And then when I go back to review my data, I have that additional stuff, because even outside of the global pandemic, I forget what I did the day before, but especially now, whenever time is this weird flat circle and this, ever-present thing that doesn't really stop, documenting those details will definitely help in the long run when it comes back to evaluating the data.
Great point, Christopher.
Dr. D, you've got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, and I'm going to show an example in the next few slides about those notes and how important they are. The point, and I'll do this quickly, the point that I want to make about this slide is the effect of the exercise. He was very active in the afternoon, and very active even after dinner, and it caused almost a similar effect that, after eating the dinner here, went out and play, and it caused the low blood sugar. And the effect of this low blood sugar, the effect of this exercise here, didn't just lower the blood sugar here, but it actually maintained it here. Even after he went to bed, dropped the blood sugar again and treated the low, and dropped again at 3 in the morning. So oftentimes this late effect of exercise can be maintained for as long as the night, all the way until 2 or 3 in the morning. After 3 a.m., typically it's gone. The effect of the exercise is no longer there. And you really have to just pay attention to what's happening here. Just because we treated this low, that means we're out of the woods. No, it's going to have an effect on sensitivity to insulin. And we may need to reduce the basal here for the entire night, all the way until 2 or 3 in the morning. And look what happened here. This low happened after he went to sleep, and we had suspended basal for almost 2 or 3 hours and still did not prevent the low from happening because of the increased sensitivity, because of the prolonged sustained effect of the exercise that happened in the late evening here. So exercise, summary. After meals, delays digestion and absorption. We have to pay attention to that. It's really important. It's actually preferable to exercise before eating. So this is something that we advocate with schools, just like if it's possible to have the kids go out and play before they eat lunch, not after they eat lunch, especially if you have children with type 1 diabetes. And the same thing for adults. If you can exercise before you eat, that's much better than exercising after you eat. Effective exercise can be prolonged, especially in the evening, like I said, and the effective exercise can be delayed. It doesn't have actually, just because it didn't have an effect and didn't cause a low blood sugar now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to cause it an hour or two later. So exercise is always going to have an impact on blood sugar and insulin sensitivity. So keep that in mind. Extended bolus. Let's talk about extended boluses. That's our second topic here. It's not just adjusting any settings. It's more of identifying what happened here and what's the cause of this. The cause of this is that we have a pretty good, decent control throughout the day here. A little bit high here in the purple, but nice and steady. There were no previous events here. Nothing has happened. No change in the basal rate, and all of a sudden we have a sharp drop in the blood sugar right here. What happened? Why did this happen? Again, going down to see what the event that correlated with this, and about an hour before this drop here, or 45 minutes, there was a big bolus for a big meal, 110 grams. I think this was 12 or 13 units, and the blood sugar dropped precipitously right here, and very quickly treated the low and went back up, and then continued to go and continued to go and continued to go. Once we see this pattern here, which is very classic for a large meal that has a very delayed digestion or absorption, it's just going to sit in your stomach. And it looks just like having, exercise after eating, but in reality, there was no exercise because we simply asked and said, did you exercise? And said, no. And I think it's more likely because it's such a big meal. That was like probably pizza. And then it just sat there and didn't digest. And the insulin kept working and appropriately brought the blood sugar down. So what we needed to really do here is use this something called extended bolus. Instead of giving the whole 13 units here, we can say either give the whole 12 units over the next 3 or 4 hours, or divide it up and give a portion of it now and extend the rest of it later, so that we can match the digestion and the absorption of the food. So this is what's so-called extended bolus for dinner. And I often recommend that people do it for almost every dinner, because dinners are usually heavier and bigger than the rest of the day. And they're slower to digest and absorb. So use it for almost every dinner, but use it for, depends on what you eat for dinner. Do it a very long extension, 3 or 4 hours, versus a short one, just like half an hour or even 1 hour. Here's another example of a different child here from a different person eating, again, this is 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Here's the dinner here at 7 and 40, I can't see this, for 45 or 46 grams. And the blood sugar drops precipitously after that. And then it rises later on. So unlike the effect of that exercise that we will actually see immediately happening, and it starts rising right after that, you treat the low and it goes up. This is a much delayed and sustained increase in the rise in the blood sugar, because this meal is very slow and it just keeps going. This meal did not start to get digested and absorbed until probably here. And the reason I say that, I'm guessing, is because now we see the rise in the blood sugar right here. This is all just from treating the low. And look at this big drop from this bolus, and the food was not getting digested. So again, this is an example of what it looks like when we're not doing extended bolus, and the reasoning for we should do an extended bolus. The same thing happening here. And these are the notes that Christopher was talking about. Lunch, ramen, 44 grams. That's 44 grams, that's right here, 45 grams. And then there was ice cream on top of that, 30 grams right after that ramen. Those two things together clearly are too heavy, too much fat, too hard to digest, the pasta from the ramen. And it ended up with the insulin working here and the food not coming in until much later there. So again, an extended bolus for this one. And the point is not just dinner. Sometimes if you're eating something heavy and hard to digest for lunch, you will get the same phenomenon. You will get the low after about half an hour to an hour after the meal. And then you get the high 3 or 4 hours later. And you're kind of zigzagging up and down, and it's very frustrating. All you need to do is either delay this bolus a little bit later or extend it over 3 or 4 hours. How long do we extend it? Well, let's see, how long did it take for this food to get digested? It peaked right around here. Despite all of this extra insulin, it was still digesting. And so this is like 7 p.m. The meal was eaten at 2 p.m. It took almost 5 hours for the ramen and ice cream to actually finish digestion and absorption. So it's very, very long, and that gives you an indication of how long should I extend the bolus. Another quick example right here. Again, this was a different lunch, hamburger and fries, 45 grams, even though the person actually put in an absorption time of 1 hour in loop, because in loop you can tell the system how long do you expect this meal to take to be digested and absorbed. You can do 1 hour, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, etc. But it turned out what I learned recently is that in loop really actually does not extend the bolus for you unless you put in the time of carb absorption 4 hours or longer. That's when it actually starts adjusting the bolus for you. But other than that, it's still going to give the full bolus and you're going to get the same effect. So what you need is really use an extended bolus if possible, or do something else. I don't know what people do with loop, but the point here is that this is the effect of a heavy meal, and watch for that. Whether it's for lunch or for dinner, same hamburger and fries, almost the same amount, a little bit more, 60 grams. Dinner or lunch, the same thing can happen, not just the dinner time. So extended boluses. When do we need to do an extended bolus? Obviously, for people who are not using loop, they can do that. Even with control IQ, you can do an extended bolus. You can split it. Some of it now, some of it extended. So for every fatty or heavy meal, which is most dinners, but sometimes lunch too, as we saw, any fatty or heavy meal, lots of fat, pizza, cheese, fried food, that requires an extended bolus because it's going to be slow to digest. Heavy meals mean like really heavy meals, like refried beans, big burrito. Mexican food oftentimes can actually, it depends on what you're eating, obviously, or sometimes even Chinese food, if it's lots of heavy, lots of fried food. Anything that's fried is going to be heavy. Large meals, sometimes if a person is eating unusually large meal, if it's a child who eats 30 to 40 grams usually, and all of a sudden he's eating 120 grams, even though it's not fatty, it's not heavy, but if it's a large meal, that can delay the digestion and absorption. And the other part to consider is hard to digest food, which we don't normally think about, like pasta and popcorn and corn tortilla chips, for example. Anything that's made of corn is usually much slower to digest than things that are made of rice or potato or flour. And even pasta, even without any sauce or any fat, the pasta itself is actually much harder to digest. So I would consider using an extended bolus for pasta. The upfront portion versus the extended, for how long, we talked about that, touched a little bit. And just going to end up, if we have 5 more minutes, Christopher, with I think the last 2 or 3 slides of this issue, the question of how long should I extend the bolus and how much upfront and how much do I extend the percent of extension. And here's the nice little note about dinner here, Afghani rice with beef and veggies and yogurt and 56 grams. So you look at this and you say, well, that doesn't look like a very heavy meal, just a little bit of rice and meat and veggies and some yogurt added up to 56 grams. So what you actually did here is did a large amount up front, about 80% up front, and extended 20% of the bolus for just about 2 hours and said that should be enough. Well, actually, it turned out that this was too much up front and caused a low blood sugar right here before the food started to get digested. And look, when the food started to get digested, it took almost 3 hours later to actually do that, and caused a high blood sugar almost all night. And the mother was just up all night doing boluses here to bring it down, unfortunately. So the 80% upfront and extended for 2 hours didn't really work for this particular meal. And next time when we eat the same meal, we should try much less insulin upfront, much more extended, and probably much longer extended, because this meal is really, really slow to digest. And the next slide is going to show the exact opposite, which is this is how an extended bolus in Tidepool look like, by the way. This was extended for 4 hours, and not all of it. This was 30% upfront and 70% extended over 4 hours here. And what actually happened here is that the blood sugar started rising very quickly and very high, over 300, right after this meal, the dinner time. And that's because there wasn't enough insulin given up front. It turned out that this meal was not as heavy as they anticipated. It turned out that the digestion happened very quickly and caused a high blood sugar right away because there wasn't enough insulin up front. However, because there was a lot of insulin given later and extended for so long, it actually caused a later low blood sugar because there was no more food getting digested here. It all completed here, but we still had this extended bolus working. It actually caused a hypoglycemia right before midnight, which again was treated nicely. And then there was a suspension of the basal here to help with it. So that really worked very well. And we had a pretty good night after that. But the point here is, again, looking back and saying, if I eat this meal again, I'm not going to do 30, 70% over 4 hours. I'm actually going to do probably 70 now and extend 30 minutes for 1 hour or 1.5 hours. That would work much better. And the very last slide here is the delayed carb entry and bolus, particularly those who use loop or anything else. I think it's really important to remember that if you eat a meal right here, and we uncover this by again going left to right and then going back down and lining things up, clearly the meal was eaten here because we can see the sharp rise in the blood sugar. And if it's eaten here, where's the bolus? The bolus didn't come until an hour later. If you're going to bolus an hour later after you ate, you really need to pay attention of not bolusing for the high blood sugar and the carbs, because you're going to end up having a low blood sugar later, because that's kind of what happened here. Actually, what happened here is that this person is using loop, blood sugar is rising, the system loop sees it, it's rising, it's predicting a high blood sugar, it increases the basal rate so much, it actually went all the way up. Instead of 0.6 units, it made it 6.5 units an hour for about 10 or 15 minutes to counteract this predicted high blood sugar. And then the bolus came in on top of that. So the bolus on top of this, and the blood sugar started dropping. And loop sees that and is predicting a low, and it turns off the basal suspense completely for 3 hours, and it still wasn't enough. It was barely enough to sort of just land it in a safe zone, and still had a tiny little hypoglycemia here that we treated. But the point here that in loop, you can actually, if you forget to eat, you can put the 20 grams, but you can tell it, I actually ate this half an hour ago or an hour ago or whatever time it was. It will factor that into the calculation, and it will factor in some of this rise in blood sugar. It's because of that missed bolus over there and the 20 grams that you ate an hour ago. And if you're not using loop, then make sure that you pay attention to this. If you're going to bolus an hour later, don't bolus for the blood sugar and the carbs. Bolus for either the blood sugar or the carbs, but not both. Otherwise, you end up getting too much insulin and you have a low blood sugar a couple of hours later. And are we on time, Christopher?
We are 2 minutes under the wire. Nice work.
Right.
All right. So I'd like to thank you for not calling me out for having a consistent rise in blood glucose during weekday mornings. Spoiler, that was my data at the beginning, although I do feel targeted a little bit on that one. Yeah, I love my job, but work is interesting. Anyway, thank you again, Dr. D. This has been fantastic. I'm going to stop your sharing right there and say hi, everybody. And one quick reminder as we sign off. Thank you again, Deborah, for your question. One last note, diabetestelemedicine.org. For all you clinicians out there looking for telemedicine resources from the Tidepool community, or from the Tidepool team, excuse me, that's where you can go for that. As always, support@tidepool.org is your email address. Whenever you have questions around the Tidepool experience, we are here to answer them for you. As a reminder, tidepool.org/webinars, we've got a whole archive of fun stuff for you to engage in, including Dr. Adi's presentation on basal testing and optimization. And this one will also be uploaded and linked from tidepool.org/webinars after the fact as well. Speaking of Dr. Adi, we've got one more on the Dr. Adi Settings Extravaganza Express Marathon. We're going to be kind of going over all the general techniques that have been discussed over the past few webinars that Dr. Adi has engaged with us in, and mostly engaging in a Q&A. So if you've got questions, that webinar will be taking place at the end of September, on the 24th. You can register for that at tidepool.org/webinars, and hopefully we'll see you all there. Lastly, as a reminder, Tidepool is a nonprofit organization. We do always appreciate donations and support from the community out there. So if you do want to support Tidepool in some form or fashion, either with a donation or you can make a donation and get a fun, comfy Tidepool t-shirt, go to tidepool.org and click on Get Involved at the top, and then there'll be a link. There'll be options within that page to support Tidepool along your way. And again, we always thank everybody out there for your support of our awesome efforts and our nonprofit mission. So that has been our exciting webinar today, talking around understanding diabetes data to understand and evaluate the effect of everyday diabetes life. One last time, Dr. Adi, thank you for taking some time to walk everybody through all this stuff. Thank you out there for sticking around for this webinar, and we'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon. Thanks very much.